Sort of a thank.
Now we got the rabbi. Right. We gotta get Darcy in the middle somewhere.
Chicken in the middle.
Oh, hang on. Sorry. It's like weird.
Can you do that fun one again? Where you're like, do a selfie. That was the one I was going to post, actually.
Awesome.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, let the games begin. I would like to welcome all of you here to our last session for the season on Why Believe in God. And I would like to welcome the God Squad here. Imam Fahad Mirza, coming all the way from Pembroke Pines, from Al-Hikmat Islamic Center, Rabbi Matthew Durbin from Temple Beit Hayam, right here in Stuart, Florida, and Father Christian Anderson from our home here at St. Mary's. Woo! I'm Darcy Weir. Before we... Thank you. Before we officially start, I just want to thank the God Squad for your forthright, thoughtful, and very personal responses to last week's questions, which were admittedly pretty tough. They touched on some kind of hot topics. But I think each of you did yourselves proud in your answers, and in so doing shed a beautiful light on your respective faiths, which you represented so clearly and with such great integrity. So I want to thank you, and I know everybody would like to thank you for that. Now, this is a very strange follow-up question, but it was just asked of me to ask the rabbi, and the rabbi agreed to explain about a certain type of circumcision that is just kind of a nick of the member in question, enough to draw blood. Is that a practice? Rabbi Durbin.
So, the interesting part of that question, circumcision, as we know, coming out of the Torah, informs us that God had said to Abraham that you shall remove the foreskin for Isaac. Isaac was 8 days old, thus the tradition that when a baby boy is born on the 8th day, circumcision, full circumcision takes place. The question of the emission of blood, that comes out of our tradition where one chooses Judaism, okay? So if one male were to choose Judaism and they've already been circumcised, say at birth, we call that process in Hebrew hadafat dam brit, the emission of blood. That, right? Because you, how to say this without going red?
Is it a secondary?
You can't cut off more than you already did at 8 days. But if one is already circumcised, the process itself is through the emission of blood, to which a urologist, a physician, and forgive the expression, please, takes a little pinprick, as you would back in the day of checking for diabetes and your levels, and would squeeze in that nether region so that blood would be taken out.
So it's only for a secondary kind of thing. It wouldn't be in place of the real...
No. If one had chosen Judaism, for example, and never been circumcised, then that process itself would be full circumcision before immersion, so to speak. Pardon? As an adult, yes.
And if there are follow-up questions about that, we can get to that later. I don't want to go too much down the circumcision route at this point.
I think the easy answer is you can't do it twice. So if you've already had it done and then you choose Judaism as a faith, then we would require what we call hadafat dam brit, the emission of blood,
No slice
as a
twice.
covenant between God.
40, and you choose Judaism, you have to get circumcised.
If you haven't,
Do you want to say that for
Yes.
the audience, these questions?
I mean, it's a huge commitment. So if you're like 45 and you haven't been circumcised, you find Judaism, you want to convert, you got to get sniffed?
Yes. Yes. I will
That's a
say
commitment.
I've been doing this not for an extensive period of time. I've done it for
You
gosh,
circumcise people?
No.
Oh.
Again,
Why did you circumcise
and that's
my
one of
son?
the big
I
misnomers.
think
'Cause
this is getting out of hand.
Okay.
at 45, if you choose Judaism and you have not been circumcised, yes, you do. I would require full circumcision.
Yeah.
It is a commitment.
So, Christian, don't even think about it.
But I will say, as I know you're not 45, but if you're interested, I can help you. And just as a precursor here, I should say, I am trained as a rabbi. I pray for you and pray on behalf of you. I don't cut. I am not a physician.
That's just fine.
Right. We cut
Thank
out
you.
just in the skin of time.
Thank you.
Or the nick of time.
Well, I
Isn't
guess,
that-
Oh,
silence will prevail.
bunch of dad jokes up here.
There have been further questions having to do with masculinity. Really, it's about the nature of God and the fact that we often refer to God as He. I understand that to be a grammatical kind of default for referring to God. And I don't think that any member of the God Squad believes that God is a gendered being, male or female. Am I correct in assuming that? Okay. So the default to he may be a lingering legacy of patriarchy, but it's not something we're attributing to God.
In the
as a
Arabic,
gender.
in the biblical Hebrew, in the biblical Greek, the pronouns before God, there's interpretation there that it was more neutral. And then in English, we only have two choices.
Well, I'll speak for the Hebrew aspect. The Hebrew aspect is actually pretty specific. Okay, so it says he in Hebrew. Sorry. It says who Elohim. He is God. It is in the masculine. However, we understand that God is not male nor female, and we also subscribe to the understanding, at least for me as a progressive Reform Jew, that the Torah was divinely inspired by God, but written by men. But we do understand that God has no gender.
And we speak of the Father God. So just to make things more confusing, in Hebrew, who is he and he is she? Well, we won't even go into that.
It's a little play on words. In the Hebrew, who is he and he is she. It's just a grammatical elongation of the yud to a vav.
It's just to confuse things, really,
Yes.
for those of us who are trying to learn Hebrew.
Yes, exactly.
But we have, even if God is not male, female, and not even a person as we conceive of a human person, we've spoken about God as being personal, a being with whom we can have a relationship. Imam Fahad spoke of relating to God, and he surprised us by saying, as a slave in submission to an all-wise, all-compassionate, merciful master. And that struck me very powerfully as being so reverential, really. And I think that is because I personally have been accustomed to our contemporary language in referring to God, which has become quite familiar. it seems to take away from the transcendence of God. So in a way, your remarks were a correction to that, and I appreciated that. Imam, we have heard from Father Christian and from Rabbi Matthew about their own faith journeys. And Father Christian took on the question directly last week, why believe in God? As a Muslim, you've made it clear that you don't come to belief in God, you're kind of born with your belief in God. But why have you continued to live a life that is so deeply committed to your faith? And what would you say to somebody who said, why should I believe in God?
Thank you, Ms. Darcy. Good afternoon, everybody. Are we alive today? Okay, good, good. So that's an extremely important question, Ms. Darcy. Personally, how I would respond to that would be to share a personal story of myself, bringing someone and highlighting and reconnecting somebody from human to human. Because if you're asking someone to believe just to believe, this person is not going to believe just because you're asking them to believe, correct? So you have to give them some sort of factual, something obtainable, something tangible. You know, what better way to connect to somebody or a human is by sharing another personal story of yourself so you can understand someone, because not everybody is perfect, you know. So a personal story that I would like to share with somebody like that would be that why believing in God. This is also part of my testimony. Okay, just making sure. Personally, I actually grew up, you know, once upon a time, I'm just kidding, but I was actually born in Pakistan, right? I was born in Pakistan. I came here when I was 7 years old, and it was an extremely traditional uprising, extremely cultural as well. So on one hand, you have Pakistani culture, and on the other hand, you're also raised as a Muslim, right? So we don't know anything from the West. I've never seen somebody with blonde hair, blue eyes, brown hair. I've never seen that in my entire life. I've never seen anyone a different shade of color than myself, brown. I've never seen a jacket in my life. I've never seen something called a television. Do you guys understand where I'm coming from? I'm trying to paint the picture, right? I've never seen anybody outside from black hair, right? So I've been raised in this Pakistani culture up through the age of 7, and I was brought here through my parents, of course, seeking opportunity, of course, and as a lot of immigrant families do, also looking for a better life for myself and also my siblings. And it's not until I got into maybe high school, let me also add in that my English was not good at all. It was extremely poor, all the way to, I want to even say, middle school, right? So my English was extremely poor, and so were my parents. So they were in survival mode. My parents are in survival mode. I even wore my traditional Pakistani clothes to elementary school, and all throughout even maybe my 7th grade year through middle school. So there was a lot of diversity, a lot of influence I was having to manage, right, as a young child, you know. And my parents wouldn't understand this because all they know is that, you know, you're brought here just, you know, they're in survival mode. They're not thinking about how I'm going to, you know, conform myself to society. They're here to see how we're going to put a roof over our head and food on our table, right? So they're not thinking about what I guess I would say to my children. I'm more connected to them because I understand their trials and tribulations that they're going to go through. I understand something called identity crisis, in which I suffered through, right? Elementary school, I suffered through. You know, this is going to sound sad to the West, and even now I think back about myself. It's a little sad, you know. Like, parents are not really, from where I'm from, we don't say the word "I love you," and I'm going to get to a point. We don't connect with our children. We just do. They just do. And then by them just doing, it's automatically assumed to the child that, you know what? You understand I love you, right? There's no verbalization of that. There's no expression of that. Continuing on. Identity crisis. So you can't go back to, I couldn't go back to my parents and say, Mom, Dad, there's kids looking at me strangely, what can I get sneakers that match their sneakers? Can I dress like them? Can I not wear this eyeliner that Father Christian reminded me of a couple weeks ago? Can I not wear this eyeliner? Can I not go to school with a greasy coconut oiled head? People are looking at me strange. I need gel and I need Nikes and jeans, Levi's. What are we doing? Right? So there was no open conversation. So identity crisis deepened. Identity crisis deepened, and I dealt with this all throughout, and even going into high school. Different experiences. They say that you learn primary things in elementary, and you learn sub-adult things in middle school, and then you start to act on those sub-adult things that you learned in middle school, and then you start to take action in it through high school. I grew up in Cooper City, which was not known to have a lot of brown people, not known to have a lot of cultured ethnic people. So it was a lot of identity crisis I went through, a lot, and it was a turmoil. Exteriorly, I was smiling, but interiorly, I was crying. And my parents wouldn't understand that. I couldn't go to my parents and tell them, hey, this is going on, right? And I was dealing with this. I finished college, universities. I entered college and university, and I continued with this. This didn't go away. I thought through my adulthood, as I reached, after my adolescent ages, going into my adulthood, young adult, I thought that I would have a better understanding. I thought this was just going to go away. I thought everything just needed to be remapped, and everything would just kind of settle in, but it didn't go away, Mr. Darcy. It didn't go away. So this internal conflict that I was having continued. I finished school. I got a job. I started hanging around with different social groups. I sat at different various dinner tables. I moved to downtown Miami, which was probably the worst thing I could have ever done. And don't send your young adult children to downtown Miami. That's probably the worst place you could send your children. So I wanted to see more. I said, you know what? Let me experience something because I think I need to see things for everything to settle in, because something is missing. I'm still dealing with this internal conflict. I can't, even as a young adult, go to my parents and let them understand, hey, I'm having something internal that I just don't know what it is, but it's literally a shearing effect on my soul. And I'm acting one way, but internally, something else is just not settling in right. Something's not settling in right. I started looking at injustice. As we all know, in downtown Miami, you're going to find out. Inhumanity. The world was changing. This is post 9/11 as a Muslim young adult going to high school. Also 2000, is it 11? So many years? 2001? Post 9/11. I just don't know the year. 2001 or 2011. And this was a lot of things happened, right, to me as a young adult. And exteriorly, again, I want to reemphasize, I was fighting within myself. My friends didn't understand me. As a young adult, my coworkers didn't understand me. The social wealthy group that I was hanging out having dinners with in downtown Miami, which I thought they would understand me, they didn't understand me. And I just, you know what? I moved, I changed my phone number, and I just let my soul take over. I moved, I changed my phone number, I let my soul take over. I didn't even share this with my parents, really. And I just let my soul do the driving, because exteriorly I was the one driving, and I didn't let my soul do the driving. So I let my soul lead me this time. Instead of me doing it, I let my soul lead me this time. And sincerely, I asked God to just fix the outside and uniform it to the inside. And
become integrated.
Become integrated. And through that, I found God's mercy. I learned that it's not, sometimes you just have to give up. Sometimes you just have to give up, let it implode, and go through life's tests and trials and experiences. And I'm actually grateful for that, because a lot of people, I find, that don't go through experiences that are challenging, don't go through difficulties that are challenging. They seem to think that everything is okay. And it's not until turmoil and this soul-ripping effect on your body, you realize that, you know what, something is not right. And you find that even now, you find that in some of the most, Western, high societies, celebrities, you find that in millionaires, you find that in billionaires. Something is missing. You would think to yourself, you watch the news and you're like, you know what? Why are these people committing suicide? Even then, Miss Darcy, I'll tell you, and I'll share this with you guys. It was mild depression I was going through. It was so deep and dark that I went through. And literally, I moved into an area called Wynwood in Miami, which is literally like a hippie town, that I thought that, let me just start off organic. Let me start off organic, and let me just start clean and let myself open up to God and let Him tell me where I need to go. What is my purpose? What is my purpose in life? And, you could be that individual that's saying, let's just be passive about this. Let just God lead me the way. And everything else is just going to fall into effect. But then I realized after, Miss Darcy, that it's not something passive you have to do. Worship comes in all different forms. This here today, we're here. This is a form of worship. Sharing our ideas, sharing our faith, sharing our beliefs, this is a form of worship, right? Remembering God is a form of worship. Sitting here listening is a form of worship because it takes time out of your day to remember God. And I think that was my biggest challenge through my life, and I'm grateful for that again, that God put me through that for me to find home.
So if a person said to you, why should I believe in God? Your answer, in addition to your testimony, would be really to make you whole, because every one of us has that yearning and sense of something's wrong, something's radically wrong.
Right.
So you would identify that in the
Absolutely.
other person and
Absolutely.
say, seek God.
I don't know if anyone else is thinking the same question, but the one question I have for you.
Sure.
What was the most bizarre custom in the West that you experienced when you came over?
As a young adult or a college student?
As a young adult.
That's,
Grilled cheese.
You won't believe it, but I couldn't eat any kind of dairy products, and kids at school would find it funny that I wouldn't eat pizza or Cheetos, anything with dairy, anything with milk related, because I was used to drinking buffalo milk and goat's milk, literally out of the teat of the animal. And I couldn't conform with that, and kids thought that I was crazy. Like I would say, macaroni and cheese that smells like poop, really. Another thing I remember going home, this is a true story. It's all true, but I remember going home from school, elementary school, I think maybe the first week of my class, and I told my Mom, I had to pinch somebody's skin because I never saw something like that. I never saw pink skin, Mom, and I saw somebody with yellow hair. Could you believe that? I saw somebody with, they had a painted eyes, Mom. And I saw like blue eyes, and she's looking at me. I remember this conversation with my mother, and she's looking at me like, what are you talking about, right? But I'd never in my million years, it's like finding an alien. You know how we would feel if we go outside those doors and we see a spaceship landing? What type of awe we would be in? That's what I experienced.
Total culture shock.
I never saw anybody with blonde hair, blue eyes in my life. I've never thought this creature existed.
You've come a long way, Fahad.
I've never thought this creature existed. And now there's a room full of you. And
they're all listening to you.
I remember pinching this person at school, like, what is this? What is this thing that's on you? And I never saw it in my life. And
You basically went on a what's the word I'm looking for, Darcy? When we go to the Holy Land, you went on a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage. Thank you. You went on a pilgrimage to Wynwood, but you had to remove yourself from everything that you knew, and to be able to listen to God, even in Wynwood's pretty boisterous, but still, I guess it was enough for you to.
It's kind of the reverse of a mountaintop experience. It's kind of the abyss, in a way.
Right. Because conforming to the West for myself, it wasn't helping me seek God, right? It was an illusion. It was I was illusioned by the fancies of life, the lights and the glimmer and glitz. And I realized maybe I need to work harder as in my career to become like that, to become like this. For me, success was illusioned that I had to live like this because the West tells you that this is what success is, when in fact our Holy Scripture says success lies in your prayer.
Yeah. On a personal note, I had somewhat the same experience in my own search. I was challenged to read the 4 Gospels in answer to a question I had asked. And what struck me was in 3 of the Gospels, Jesus says, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" And I had grown up seeing people losing their soul to success, to money, to climbing the ladder, to stepping on others, and losing their soul. So that, a similar kind of search.
Next week, we're going to have Ms. Darcy share hers. If you have, we're going to have to ask you yours as well.
Next
give
week
give
will
us
not
2
go.
minutes, Ms. Darcy.
We're
Give us a
going-
bonus.
As a bonus, right. Next time. Rabbi, how would you describe the relationship that you as a Jew have with God? Is it as a master, a slave to a master, as a child to a parent, or something totally other?
I mean, I would say in some way it is very much like Imam. Born and raised in a Jewish family. The belief in God, I guess, may have been just transmitted by my parents. It was just the thing we do, right? So when we go to services, that we learn some of the prayers through religious school and through instruction, right? So when we go to that, moment in our tradition that says, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, that hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And we go forward from there. There's always a belief, at least for me.
But what is the image then that you are picking up as a child? Is it as to a father, as to a master?
So I would say as a young child, it was, and forgive me, the image of an old white man with a gropily long beard, sitting on a throne on a cumulus cloud.
But you got over that.
I don't know. No, but I say this wholeheartedly. And I try and say to myself, when did that image change? Why did that image change? Because it's childish? Because it's childlike? I mean, I see it with my own kids, right? I got a 9-year-old, my youngest, who, in some way, I think she has that same vision. Well, you don't want to do that because God is looking down and God will see everything. And yet, as a child, I should also preface, I grew up in a very large Jewish community. My home synagogue in its height was like 3,000 families. It was big. I lived in a Jewish area. The country itself, I grew up in Toronto in Canada. We had 300 and some odd thousand Jews.
So we want you to focus.
Yes, I am. Right? There's a reason to this. And when I went through elementary and I went through middle and certainly high school, the majority of us were all Jewish. So I shared that collective understanding amongst my peers. I always had this deep sense of belief, and in some way belonging. I believe in God, right? And when I finished high school and I went to university and I was in college and I studied everything else, everyone else's culture, it actually opened the door for me to start questioning my own faith. And I think that became that moment where I said, I am allowed to question. I should question God. Am I going to get a response back? It doesn't matter. And my congregation knows this. I guess the big test of faith, where I actually really questioned the belief in God, was when my mother's sister passed away. From diagnosis to death was 90 days. She died of pancreatic cancer. She was very young, late 40s. And I remember the moment my mother got the phone call at 3 in the morning and started crying. And that next day, I remember literally getting out of my house, looking up and saying, how could you? I prayed to you. I prayed for months every day that you would heal her. And I remember saying, you know what, God? I'm angry.
So this is very much like the Psalms. I mean, it's David shouting at God. It's very legitimate. But I don't think at that point you were thinking of God on the cloud as an old.
No.
So I don't want to keep.
So let me say it really succinctly.
Give it a good try. Give it a good try.
The vision of God as an old white man on a cloud shifted to the understanding for me, and it really was at my aunt's death where I realized God is not, for me at least, a figure. God is anywhere and everywhere that we wish God to be. That God is not a miracle worker. That God effectively is there for you at times of crisis and times of joy. And then it shifted to the feeling and the understanding, for me at least, that it's about where I see God. I see God in the good that I do. I see God in those moments of kindness and moments of trying to help.
And we will come back to that, I promise.
So I'm going to...
Thank you. Because we want to give Father Christian a chance to address that. Yes, we do. That same question. You know, Jesus told his disciples, I no longer call you servant, I call you friend. And we have this hymn, what a friend we have in Jesus. Do you think of God, of Jesus, as a friend? Or is it much more complicated because you do worship a triune God? Mm-hmm. How do you wrap your head around your worship? As a child,
Yeah, I don't think we can wrap our head around it, to use that expression. I think our brains are just too small to be able to understand fully the complexity and the vastness of God, the unmoved mover, the creator of all creation. So as Christians, we have this triune theology of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit to help us to try to understand just a smidgen of the power and the truth and the essence of God. And I still think probably when we get to where we all get to, our minds will just be, will be blown open to the vastness and the beauty and the incredible power of who God is. But right now in this realm, and through our walk, especially as Christians, that, yes, we have this idea of the Creator, the Redeemer, and the Sustainer, the Father, Son, the Holy Ghost, the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. And then as Christians, sometimes we become a closer relationship to one aspect of that Godhead, the three in one. So for me, at St. Lawrence Episcopal Church, I grew up with this huge stained glass window. It was enormous that we always prayed to. The cross was in front of it, and behind that altar, though, was Gethsemane, Jesus on his knees. So I think that definitely informed of my relationship with Jesus, and this Jesus who is so human, and also God, but human, that would be kneeling in the garden saying, Lord, please take this cup from me, and praying so hard that he was bleeding. And so there was a relationship of saying, well, you get me. You also struggled at times. At this time, for us to know that it's okay to struggle and just come to God. So friend, yes, but I do think that my faith elevates tremendously when I look at God as the all-powerful that I need to be obedient to and to kneel down to. And that happens for me at confession. So if Jesus was a friend, I wouldn't be sort of like confessing to my friend. I like to, you almost like prostrate yourself and just say, man, I really screwed it up, God, and for you to forgive me. So I will admit I was inspired by, at first, it was jilting to hear this slave talk and to be obedient to God, but I do think we're missing that a bit. And so I am inspired by that idea because I do think that there's a liberation in that, because there's an ultimate trust in this Father in heaven and say, I obey you, and I choose to obey you because I trust you so much with my life.
And because God is so worthy, is so
Yes.
transcendently wonderful, if you
Yes.
will, that we owe him that reverence, and you become aware
Yes.
of that.
Yes, but out of all those, I think the idea of Jesus has worked for me just because it's who is God, why is God, what is God? Well, just go read and follow and talk to Jesus, God here on earth, as a Christian.
Yeah. Thank you. We've talked about this relationship, how we relate to God, and as with any relationship, you have to maintain it, whether it's a friendship or a marriage or your relationship with God, in order for it not to become stale or routine, just a matter of course or a discipline. So my question is to you, Imam, how do you maintain freshness in your relationship with God? How do you keep that alive?
One way that we maintain that relationship is oftenly calling upon God, of course, whether it be through your prayer, whether it be through your acts throughout your day, up to even, I'll tell you, I teach at a madrasa at every single night. Well, Monday, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, we meet all together to remember God, and we just recite the Quran. And on Fridays is our Sabbath. So one way that we do is, of course, we reflect back on the Quran, but just not reciting it passively, right? We just don't recite it passively. We experience the Quran. We stop and we contemplate verse after verse. As a matter of fact, a verse in Arabic is said, it's translated as an ayah. It's called an ayah. An ayah in Arabic, it's translated in English as a sign. So there's over 6,000 signs of God within the Quran. So reminding ourselves and reciting the Quran is not just reading it passively. It's actually allowing the Quran to you experience the Quran. You let the Quran speak to you, because for us, the Quran is written by man. However, it's the speech of God, right? A little different than what my colleague here is saying to you guys regarding that it's inspired by man. For us, it's said through the words and the speech of God's mouth, right? And it's written in a way that you'll find all throughout the Quran. It's saying qala, qala, say. I mean, why does God have to say the word say when you're reading it? I mean, you're reading it, it's saying, say to them that this, say to them to that, say to them this, say to them that. Who's God speaking to is our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that tell the people that this is what it is. Tell the people that this is what it is. And oftentimes I think back, going back to the question, God says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, in chapter 3, he says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, haqqa tuqatihi wa la tumutunna illa wa antum muslimun. And what God is saying there for us is that fear God, remember God in the way that he expects to be remembered, right? Because this will ultimately establish your relationship to who you are to God and who God is to you, right? So this reaffirms that relationship that you're the slave and I'm the master. And there shouldn't be any problem with that. Out of humility, if you think of it, there shouldn't be any problem about feeling that, you're owed to God, right? And then not that God owes you. You're owed to God, and you have an obligation to God. So God says here, for you who believe, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, haqqa tuqatihi, haqq means the right. Be dutiful to God and fulfill his right. Wala tumutunna, and do not die, do not return back to me, God is saying, illa wa antum muslimun, that do not return back to me until you are in full submission to me. So he's not saying whether you come back as a Christian or whether you come back as a Jewish or he's saying in full submission to me. And he's saying that he's not talking to the Muslims here, he's talking to humanity. He's talking to everyone. and he's saying to do not return back to your Lord until you're in full submission. So
Sounds a little like with Jesus, to him every knee will bow and swear that Jesus Christ is Lord at that time when we come back.
I find it fascinating, just some of the terminology that you used, which is almost identical, right? You said the word ayin?
ayin.
Okay.
Aya.
Ayah. Okay. In Hebrew, ayin are eyes,
Eyes.
right?
Yes. In Arabic as well.
Right? And in some way, you need to see to experience, right? You use the word chok.
Hak.
Chak.
Right.
Right. In Hebrew, chok is a statute, right? A law to which the Torah says for all time, for all peoples. It's very interesting the way the similarities work. And I just want to say, too, we are very much of the same, in some way, tradition, so to speak, is that, yes, the Torah is divinely inspired by God. There's a lot of, Moses says, and you shall say to the people, right? Something occurs something like 700,000 times. Why the repetition? Right? So that generations after will not forget the message. But I was really struck by a lot of the similarities in language that obviously come out of Hebrew and Arabic as cognate languages.
Yeah. Thank you. Hebrew and Arabic are very, very close. Father Christian, same question to you. How do you keep your relationship with God fresh and vital?
I find that it has to be kept fresh and vital by changing it up, my practices, at least that's just for me. And so recently, I found, since coming back from sabbatical, was sort of like this redo of how I would just always do my prayers, and I think it worked at a time, but I think as we grow and we develop as human beings, sometimes it causes us to have to change our disciplines or try new ones. So right now, I'm just switching up devotionals in the morning because I think there's a different part of me that's wants to go deeper and more in a contemplative place. So trying to study more Richard Rohr in the morning and trying to do more meditation. And I think we have to find diversity in the way that we talk and we walk with God. So that's important for me. But a big piece for me is preaching is, I don't know about y'all, but for me, you can't preach it if you're not walking it. And so if I come up and I try to preach a sermon on something that I have not tried to apply to my own life for at least that week, it's going to sound so superficial, and you'll be able to tell. It just won't be from the heart. So when reading the scripture and reading the gospel, and that's almost every week to preach, then you have to just apply it to your life. And that's challenging. It's really challenging. And how can I ask you to be challenged by it if I'm not challenging it myself? And so that's a big one for me. And then also new authors that I look to. Have I just been studying the same theologians? Have I been studying any theologians? Have I been listening to new voices? Because if not, then I'm just getting stuck in this silo. And I feel like I'm getting stuck spiritually. And so is there different music that I can use? So I think not constantly, but there are these seasons where my devotional, my approach to Scripture, and I would say, what would it be like, too, if Anastasia and I, we read the Quran, right? And then in doing that, how would that reflect on us understanding the Bible and us understanding our Christian walk? I mean, that's why we do this interfaith work, and this is another piece of it. This interfaith work has made me a stronger Christian. Full stop. It's not pulled me away from Christianity. It's made me a stronger Christian to understand my faith. So it was a great challenge to me, and you have to always ask these whys. Why do we do this? But I hope it's made you a stronger Muslim. It's made you a stronger Jew. And Darcy, all the above.
I do have to learn a lot in order to ask you appropriate questions. But it's true in so many ways. We cannot understand our own country until we leave it and see it from a distance. And I don't think we understand our faith profoundly until we experience the faith of others and ask these kinds of questions of one another. It just deepens all of us.
Yes.
I don't know, Father, or Rabbi, excuse me. I was going to call you Father Matthew. Rabbi Matthew, how do you keep your own faith fresh? Are there practices or changes that you make periodically? Or?
I mean, I look at it as my life in Judaism is a lifelong pursuit of Jewish knowledge. I don't know everything, although contrary to my children's belief. But to keep it fresh, I mean, I think it's also in these moments of transition, right? As a young adult, I would ask God for things, whereas now I find that I pray for things, and I think that there's a difference. I'll ask God for strength. Mm-hmm. Give me strength, God. Get me through today. And I think that for me, it is to keep it fresh is in some way to remember, is to look at where we are, where we've come from, but also in some degree of importance, where do I want to be? And how do I get there? And I look at all three of those as God guide me, right? We know Friday night, Saturday morning, Saturday is Shabbat for us as Jews, and crossing over that Palm City Bridge, going into Stewart, and I say this to our Torah study, is that's where, in some way, I see God. I look over, I see the water, I'm in awe of what is around me, and really not force myself, but allow myself to bring God in and say, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, God, for the beauty of what we have. Sometimes, to keep God fresh and to keep learning fresh, I like to listen to my community, right? Rabbi, tell me about this philosopher or that philosopher. One interview question I had once was, if you could teach a class, what class would that be? And I thought to myself, that's an amazing question. I'd probably look at something on mystical aspects of Judaism, right? Known as Kabbalah. The question that was asked was, why? Why that? And I said, because I'm not extremely well versed in it, and it would make me learn more. And I think that's really where I see God is through our learning, through our questioning, right? I mean, I love this that we've done, and even the precursor of Priest and myself, right? I learn a lot about you and our faiths, and in some way it is inspiring that quest for more.
Yeah. Thank you. You spoke last week very movingly about your experience with the woman with rheumatoid arthritis, whose body was so twisted and deformed, and it was a shock for you when you first saw her. And by the time you had worked with her for some months, she was a manifestation of beauty to you. And that was clearly a transformative experience. And I'm just wondering, and this is a question for you, Rabbi, but for each of you, that effort to see God in another, to find that beauty, is that a discipline? Is that a way of keeping it fresh?
The short answer, yes.
You can stop there.
The slightly shorter answer. I think you have to experience it for yourself to understand the empathy that we can give to others. 25 years ago, I was diagnosed with a skin disease known as Jesner's disease. There's no rhyme or reason to why it happens. It flares up only on the face. My doctor said, don't worry about it. I used to get cortisone injections. It was painful, right? It would either flare up really badly or it would be at bay. There was one time I was in upstate New York, and a woman came running after me as I exited Price Chopper.
Does this happen all the time?
Okay? It wasn't because I was a rabbi, but came up to me and said, hey, sir, are you okay? And I said, yeah, why not? She said, well, your face. And it was that moment where I had thought to myself, oh my gosh, I know what I look like. it looks angry, it looks, right, painful. It's not. But it made me so conscious and so aware of what other people see, the judgment that others give. And I'm not going to say that as a rabbi, and forget the position, or even as a Jew, as a human being, have I ever judged somebody on physical appearance before? Yes. I'm not going to lie. Of course we have. But that moment made me stop and say, never again. Because what other people see in me and what I see in other people, I need to recognize the divine. I need to see God.
Beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you. That was strong. Thank you. Imam Fahad, do you look for God in other people?
I think Rabbi has the most amazing anecdotes. I don't know how he. It's like a Rolodex of amazing anecdotes. I don't know how he. I don't know through his life experiences. I don't know, but they're always so relational, and I just want to commend him for that because it's just being present today, and being present in every single minute of your life is truly an act of God. Because if you can be here, like for example, if I ask you to read a book, would you be able to recite back that book to me? Or would you be able to give me a synopsis of that book without leaving out some vital points of that book? So going back to this anecdote joke that I made, but it's really in relation to my answer, I think that being present and being aware and being conscious of God is one of the most important aspects of finding God, right? So again, back to asking you, what did you remember from that book? I mean, how many of you can tell me what you did 3 days ago? Really? Think to yourself for a second. How many of you can really tell me what you wore 2 days ago? Or what you ate for lunch? Or what that conversation you had with your family member over the phone? You don't remember. It's not until you look to your text messages, you're like, oh, I told her that. Oh, I said this, right? Or you look through your history. But that's because we're not present, right? We're not present. We're walking around aimlessly. We're waking up, we're brushing our teeth, and we're not really being present and being aware of where God is. It's not until you pass that bridge and you realize God's manifestation in this beautiful ocean. And you look up into the heavens and you look at the stars at night. How could these things be sustaining themselves, hanging as bright lamps in the sky without anything holding them up? That doesn't make sense logically. If I hold this phone and I let it go, it'll fall to the floor. How could this be? How can you trust in a man that you've never met? How can you trust a man or a woman that you've never met to fly you on an aircraft, and you never even know that there's somebody flying this machine? How can you trust that? And they're going to tell you that they're just going to go up into something that's not holding it up and just go from one land to another land in X amount of hours, exactly to the day and time and minute? How can you trust that? So this goes back in our teachings in chapter 3, verse 190, and says, certainly in the signs of God, inna fi khalqis samawati, in the heavens and the skies and on the earth, waqtila, and how the light and how the day alternates. How does that happen? How does that happen? How is the sun only to an exact mile distance from the earth without consuming and burning us? If it was a little too far, we would die. If it was a little too close, we would die.
This is getting back to the teleological argument of design. And also, I just want to say, there's a Christian practice called the examen,
Right.
Which you would do at the end of the day, looking over the day. When did I see God in that? Where did His light shine? And where did I perhaps sin or fail Him? And confess that, ask forgiveness. But the more you practice that examen, the more you are aware during the day, ooh, that's a sign of God right there. And it helps at the end of the day to recall the day. Father Christian, I'll turn to you about your own sense of seeing the presence of God in people, in circumstances. Is that a conscious discipline on your part?
Yeah, and we were this morning for our staff, we have our devotional and our Eucharist together, and I used, Rabbi, your story of the woman you came to visit who had the rheumatoid arthritis. It's just starting because we was referencing to that and to the book Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson, of how we need to seek mercy and express mercy in one another, because we all need mercy, and not to be judging others, and just how the beauty that you found with this woman and she found in you, and then you were honest with her at the end when she said, "Thank you for not judging me by my appearance." You're like, well, actually, no. At first, I was terrible, but through this, we both found God. So I'm convinced more and more as people of faith that finding God, it's so easy to find it in your loved ones and easy to find it in great moments and high moments. It's so easy to find it in the calm waters. I'm convinced more and more in a cantankerous time that we're in that you're going to be, we are called right now especially as people of a merciful God to be finding God in our enemies. And so if we can continue to find God, and if both sides are trying to find more of God and seeking God and being curious about the other and saying, I need to understand this. Why? Because you're a child of God. I know you were born of God. No one got out here without being born from God. And then the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God can arrive into it, and then it starts to melt our hearts a bit, because now I'm coming to this conversation. We can still have a very healthy argument. We can have, as Father Joe would say, vigorous fellowship. But we're not going to get anywhere in this country, especially in this country right now, if we just keep on hating the enemy and hating the other. And so as people of God, what do we stand for? Well, we have the audacity to say that I'm going to find God in you. And I might not have the human ability to do that, so I'm going to pray for God to be alive in me, to find and share God between the two of us if we're both children of God. And so the merciful stories have come from that, from mentors and from all the books and movies we watched. It starts there. And I commend that book, Just Mercy, of just say, just come with a merciful heart at first, because then there's the opportunity for God to show up. Without that, then we push God out. And people are wondering, like, where is God right now? Why is he not here? We're pushing him out.
Yeah.
But if we choose love and choose to find God in one another, there is the hope for God to show up.
Just Mercy is a wonderful film as well, which we did on movie night, just
That's right.
incidentally. I was going to ask you all about original sin, but I see the time, and I know that there are people who really would like to ask questions. So we might have to push original sin to the next time, although I'll tell you what G.K. Chesterton said about it. Original sin is the only doctrine that's been empirically validated by 2,000 years of human history. But I know it's not going down that well in Islam or in Judaism, so we'll have to return to that. But I would invite those of you who have questions, there's a microphone up here, and Jim Menendez very graciously will circulate it if you raise a hand if you have a question.
My question is for the three holy men. Recently, I read in the newspaper that over 700 children in Martin County are homeless. What are you doing to bring God to them?
Down and dirty right away.
I know that there are organizations to which, as a temple, we subscribe to. I certainly know St. Mary's, and I'll let Father Anderson talk on that behalf. But we know that there are institutions within our county that help support, to which, as a Jewish community, we say we must. Right? House of Hope, we support very, very much through food drives and other donations. Family Promise, which we are a supporting congregation. We are not a, what's the term? So, a host congregation, and that's just based on a variety of different things because of our preschool and the makeup of our community. Trying to support those institutions that we know do positive work and help families and help feed children so that they don't go hungry. I know from a personal perspective, being able to support our school districts so that they can provide free meals for children, and especially once school is out, throughout the summer as well, through aftercare programs. But I certainly agree with you. The bringing God in is through the actions and the awareness that we create within our communities.
And it's a duty in Islam. I mean,
Yes, absolutely. That's actually a duty through Islam, not only through the Quranic aspect, but also through the actionable aspect, which is the model of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and all the other messengers, right? So he himself was actually an orphan. He lost his dad before he was maybe the age of 3, and he lost his mother at the age of 6. He was raised by an African slave who was actually like no, I shouldn't use that term, it's not a slave. It was actually a midwife. He was raised by his midwife. And so it's an obligation for the Muslim communities, and we do have organizations all throughout the United States. One of the most formidable organizations is actually ICNA, which is called ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America, in which they host and foster. They have different programs for also domestic violence. They have legal programs as well. They also have programs for orphans in which they actually, we as a community would foster those children if legally. We would foster those children legally. We find that also with refugees that come from overseas. We have organizations here that also help place those children into households so that they would be able to be taken care of properly. We do have initiatives like that in South Florida. That's surprising, 700 and well.
Father Christian, do you want to speak to that?
I do think as people of faith, there's a variety of things we do, yes, and we'll have families staying here soon at the end of the month for Family Promise, and we have a large campus, so they get rooms, and then they go there, and they go to another church. Safe Families, House of Hope, Place of Hope is now a great one. We were just dealing with a mother and her child who were sleeping in her courtyard, and so now you start to figure out that gets dicey. So who gets involved with that? And then you get the right organizations, like as Rabbi said, we're not the experts. However, I think with the bigger question is what are we doing about it? I think we better get ready to do more. Because of some of the certain cuts that come down the pipeway might be coming, with SNAP might be removed. Yeah. If that gets passed, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be homeless. And so I think religion is going to really have to now put their money where their mouth is and step in and pick up the slack. Because if there's going to be these loss of different programming that would support folks in challenging situations, then religion should be, and I think has to be, the one who's going to say, we're here. Which means we're going to have to speak with our money, we're going to speak with our feet, our hands, and with our hearts. And be at the time when it was religion that was building the hospitals and the orphanages. That's and right. The schools. And so there's going to be a lot there for us to step in and say, here I am, Lord.
Good thought. Thank you. Another question.
God, I love his beard.
Yeah. It's a good Swedish man with a Swedish beard.
Thank you, for your religious leaders for being here. And in answering this question, why believe in God, I'm troubled, and more troubled lately by this issue that the woman right at the end of her answers. Why is it that in this, the richest country in the world, and compared to other wealthy democracies, we are the most God-believing, the most religious, observing people of all these wealthy democracies. And yet we do the worst job of caring for the poor and the sick and the refugees. And I know
So the question is, why have religions failed to impress those duties on us? Is there an answer to that?
Every time we go to Ghana, that's where my wife is from, and we go and spend time out there. We've been out there, try to go every other year. Just reminded what it's like to be in a groupistic culture, and where family is everything and the community is everything. There really is no homelessness in Ghana. There is no alcoholism, there is no drug addiction, and that could be for other reasons. But I do know that no one really falls through the cracks because the community is always there. You have a million uncles and a million aunts, and everyone takes responsibility to care for those. So I do think the challenge for us as Westerners is in what made us such a powerful and awesome country is that rugged individualism. Also, though, is a struggle, and I've learned this now as a churchman, of being involved with the church and following the gospel. It does become a challenge then for the more groupistic way of looking at things, of how we care for one another, because we've learned through our ways to just really do it yourself. And there's power in that individualism, and that's helped us rose up. If not, we'd be, still bowing to the king. So I think as Christians, or at least people of religion, it will be that, again, comes back to the leaders of faith to say, how do we use the best of all these worlds? Because I'm sure there's folks in Ghana would love to have a lot of the amenities that we have here in the States. But how do we use the best of it all, where to have that groupistic attitude where no one does fall through the cracks and just say, you're kind of on your own, you got to go. Where in other places where it's more groupistic, it's like, no, you come stay with me, we're here, we're all in this together. And I think our three Abrahamic faiths definitely preach that. And when you see the beauty of that, I could just speak for St. Mary's, is that there becomes that, for us, the body of Christ. And so if we were to come here and say one of our own is homeless, I'd be shocked if we didn't have this groundswell of support. Emmanuel Lutheran, the family that their house burned down, I believe that was from Emmanuel Lutheran. I contacted that pastor and I was just like, how can we help? He's like, we're good. Because that whole community rose up. So it's there, the vitality is there.
So it's overcoming our cultural tendency to be individualistic and self-centered, really, in this country is kind of what you're saying. How can we become...
Yeah, and I think the truth is it's what makes America so wonderful and beautiful. So how do we just have the both and I think religion is a big piece that helps with that. When religion is not preaching that hard individualism, I think that's.
But I also think you just said it in and of itself in one word, which was awareness. Right? We need to be aware of what's going on. Mm-hmm. I mean, as Jews, I'll speak from my own perspective and certainly our movement. Right? Katrina hit New Orleans. The Jewish community came from all four corners of this country, came together to help dig out and get people together, right? Russian Jewry that were under very difficult and murderous conditions in Russia were airlifted out of Russia, put into Israel during their waves of immigration. Ethiopian Jewry, during their very bloody and nasty civil war, we Jewish community brought them out and brought them to safety, right? If anyone's actually seen the movie on Netflix, The Red Sea Diving Resort, we're seeing. True story, right?
But would you say Jews have always been very good about taking care of the families?
Yes, because it's also, like Imam Fahad said, it's not for us to choose. It's commanded upon us. We are to help the less fortunate than ourselves. And it's that awareness, right? When we are aware of certain things, we band together. We have a religious action center based in New York City. We have a commission on social action that is based in Washington, right? That work not only for the Jewish communities, but for all communities, right? That are in need of help. We have the American Jewish World Service that goes into other nations around the world to help them in some way overcome some of their challenges. A classic example, Dakar, Senegal, West Africa. Right? The American Jewish World Service sent over delegates who were there for about 3 weeks who built latrines, toilets, for the local community because they were getting sick. They were, for lack of a better term, they were defecating right near their kitchen with no ventilation. The American Jewish World Service went into these communities and taught them how to have proper ventilation, how to build latrines so they would stop getting as sick.
I just want to stop you there because I think, Chris's question still stands.
Has religion failed the poor?
That the faiths have been at work, but we've got to do better.
More.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Is we can always improve. We can always strive for betterness.
And especially, as Father Christian said, pointing into the future when things are going to get tougher for a lot of communities with the SNAP
we're
program.
on.
And
Religion
so
is on.
Really quick.
So,
Yeah.
does another question arise? Are there other questions out there? That's a big hand.
Oh, we got Big Jim. Jim Pop.
Hopefully, it's just a simple one for the I'm on, and if it's too personal, don't answer it. But your life's been, you're growing up was inspirational. It's cool. Now, how are your kids versus you? Are they, Taylor Swift and all that stuff? Let's get to know you a little bit.
Right, so I think that this third generation, I would say, like my children, my parents being first, myself being second, and my children now being the third, I think that there's different experiences that they're going to face, different ideologies, different cultural attacks that they will face. I always try to reassure my son and my daughters and my other two sons. Well, one is too young to understand anything. He's a baby. But I always try to emphasize on them that it's okay. It's okay to be you. It's okay and accept who you are, right? Because you're unique. And it's okay, because my son, the other day I took him to Subway, and I made sure I wore my hat. And I was just after madrasa, and I was wearing my long thobe. And I walked into it. It's okay, you walk into Walmart that way, or you walk into the store this way, because this is who you are, right? And then if I don't exemplify it, what shame would he feel, right? He would also feel ashamed of it. So showing them, bringing them here like I did last week, that it's okay, despite what you see on TV, despite what you think, despite what, this is actionable, this is what your father's doing. This is present, Don't follow what people are telling you. Don't follow what you see. Think for yourself. I'm sitting here with a rabbi, and I'm sitting here with a Christian father, and it's okay, and we're all going to break bread together, right? And this is despite what he sees and hears about it in school, right? Because he comes home, he asks me questions. He's 8 years old. He asks me questions. Hey, Dad.
And he's also seeing that a woman is bossing you around.
Right.
Which is always a good lesson.
So they ask questions, and I'm open to those questions, it's not easy answering these questions, but I answer these questions through my actions. Instead of telling him, I answer these questions through my actions. Last night I was there teaching, and he was kind of getting a little disgruntled about his recitation. And I said, Ibrahim, his name is Ibrahim. And I said, Ibrahim, is Dad here with you? He's like, yeah. I said, do you see any other fathers here besides your father? He's like, no. I said, I was sitting in your seat one day. I was sitting in exactly where you were sitting. And I'm not the best and the most knowledgeable, but I'm here to learn still, right? And I learn through teaching. And I want to set an example. I'm not going to tell him that, but, I'm doing things actively instead of passively. It goes back to the gentleman's questions here. What are you doing about society? Whether there's homeless, whether there's all these trials and tribulations, you go through it actionable. You reach out to your Congress members, you reach out to your local organizations. If you can't do it, you support them. If you can't generate the money or the resources to go out and feed these children, then you join your community with the people that are doing it. Support them, right? You reach out to your commissioners and you have lunch and learn with them, right? You break bread with them and you make them understand who you are as a community and what are things that are important to you. Instead of protesting and putting social media wars and, you're going online, and I'm getting off the tangent here, right? But, okay, I'll stop. But long story short and synopsis, you reach out to your local representatives, your mayors, your commissioners, and to answer your questions, I do it through my actions.
Another question.
Hey, Jim, right over the right.
Back to last week, Rabbi Durga said something about we all have free will and we create our destiny. There's no divine plan. A lot of Christian kind of swirling that one, still wasn't sure if you agree or disagree, but I thought that there's a divine plan for all of us. That God has a plan for all of us. It's not we don't just make our own destiny.
So is it the tension between free will and a destination, a plan, a divine plan? And so how does free will play into the divine plan? Is that...
Well, Rabbi Durga said there is really no divine plan. There's just fate, because of free will. And I wasn't sure if that's
Yeah, I should, as I've just been reminded, we technically close at 1:30, and please feel free, if you need to leave, please do so, but if we wanted to stay a bit extra to allow other questions, so just feel free to go if you need to, but stay if you have some more questions. So we were dealing with free will and God's plan.
Predestination. Well, Rabbi, do you want to expound on what you were saying last week about God's plan?
What I was mentioning last week was the same conversation, right? Like predestiny, is our life determined or predetermined by God? Or do we have free will, which is to say that what and how we choose to live our lives is completely upon us. Now, there are consequences to both actions. What I would say is, as a Jew, I firmly believe that God does not predetermine the way that my life will go, that I am active in the process, that I believe in free will, right? I think I used the example last week. If I want to be a miserable miscreant, that's my choice, but there are consequences to it, right? The ideal is not to be, is to be giving and loving and this, that, and the other, but that's the choice that I make, right? Whereas if God had determined my path, predestiny, life would look a little bit different.
The analogy I've heard, and I don't know if it'll work for you, but is rather like a huge ship, and God is the captain of that ship. He is steering that ship. But all the individuals on it are doing whatever their will dictates. But God has the overall plan. So that sort of puts both together. God's in charge of this whole picture, but we have freedom of action within our own orbits.
I think sin, if like going to the Latin of sin, seen, without, that sin is being without God. And so when we get off and we remove ourselves from that ship, or we start doing other things, we can consciously taking the ship into other directions. And God will say, I'm not going to abandon you. I will be with you, and I will redeem it all for you. And this is how God's economy works. But it is always a choice. And God is waiting there, waiting for us to kind of to give in and to submit and to trust that main ship that's moving. But when we start to We do have will. I think we do have free will. I think that's what Eden showed us, Garden of Eden. We do have free will, and I'm not a subscriber to John Calvin's theology of predestination. I just don't think it's all set, and there's people who are predetermined who are going to be saved, and the rest, sorry, you didn't make the cut. I think we all have the empower as children of God to be choosing him every day and growing into our salvation every day to be children of God. And we could choose to go the different direction. And what is hell? Well, the hell is being without God. And now you start creating a life of hell as opposed to a life of God. But yeah, that can go on and on and on.
And the same thing with Islam, answering your question really quickly. You have to kind of hearing the rabbi and the father speak about it, but going back to the original sin, and I'm not going to touch on this, I promise you. But, Adam and Eve, God created them, right? Did he not know they were going to eat from the forbidden tree, right? But he allowed them to. He could have stopped it. So, does life start in sin when they were procreated, when children were procreated, or did life start before they were created, right? Is basically the question of theological question. So, so God allowed them to go into sin. However, it was through his mercy. We have an ayah in the Quran where Adam is seeking God's forgiveness, and God says in the Quran, it's in the Quran, that God says that we forgive you. And also going in relation to the Christian theology where, God did give them clothing to cover their privates as a sign of a mercy. So, you're allowed to have free will, and God has created you to have free will because Adam and Eve would not have sinned, right? So they did sin, but it's always through God's mercy is what we seek. We always seek God's mercy, whether you sinned or whether you're always on the straight path, which I'm sure none of us are, 100% of the time. But going back to what Ms. Darcy's saying, the ship is leading us whether you want to get on it or whether you want to take a little detour, but it's going to take you a lot more effort to swim through those currents to get back to the ship. Might as well just stay on the ship, right? Because it's going to be a lot more effort. So let's just do it the easy way and just stay on God's ship, I guess that's the best way for me to tie that together.
Stay on God's ship.
Fun fact, the sanctuary across the street is designed to look like Noah's ship. So that's looked like the ark. That's what's upside down. But that's the inspiration for the sanctuary across the street. That God's
the
sanctuary.
nave, that's Latin for ship.
Yep.
That's why a lot of churches have naves. Yeah. Another question. If you haven't, I prefer people who haven't had a question to raise your hands.
This is along the same lines of what you were speaking of. Father Christian, you speak, I was raised Jewish, and you use the concept of surrender to God. And I was just curious how surrendering and free will mesh in your mind to do that, and everyone else, what you all feel about that concept of surrender.
Yeah, so I think the great submission, then we trust, and using this image we have before, you have the free will and the choice to trust God with your life. So he doesn't just become a friend who's walking with you. He doesn't just become this great presence that I pray to or this person who kind of gives me things. I fully submit my heart, my mind, and my soul to God. And so I'm going to say, I trust you with all, even when it's really hard out there. Even when there's losses that come in my life, even when I'm going through these financial troubles, even whenever the marriage is rocky, I'm going to trust you and submit to you, which might move me to do things that I don't want to do. That means I got to go apologize. That means I got to go and just sit and wait and try to find patience in the midst of this struggle, because I'm going to trust you. You're speaking to me. And so you trust the flow. There's like this flow. I think some people call it the Holy Spirit working through you. Say, I might not like what's happening right now, but I'm trusting God in the midst of this. I'm going to keep on showing up. And it's a choice, though. I'm choosing that your way is the right way. I'm going to find more of your wisdom through Scripture, through prayer, through service to others. And I'm not going to do this on my own. I'm not going to try to figure this out on my own. You are going to be the first one who's going to inform me about that Spirit, so I submit to you. So I do think that is a choice. That is a will to say, your way is the right way, so Lord. And so that's why we do spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines, to help us listen and to submit more through prayer, through worship, through fasting. Some people, that's why they fast. I want to hear your way. I don't know which way to go. I want to hear your way of how to make these better relationships. How do I love my enemies, God? I don't know how to do that. I want to smack them all in the face. So I'm going to fast. I'm going to pray. I'm going to go to worship. I'm going to go to confession, whatever it is. I'm going to take the sacrament to lead me to it. But that's my choice to do that, because my way, I've been doing it my whole way, my life, and that hasn't gotten me anywhere.
Just piggybacking off of Father Christian's, basically it's exactly the same way that we do it. Islam, in essence, it actually means submission, right? So when you hear somebody saying, "Hey, I'm Muslim," it's Islam, the derivative of it, the makhraj, the what's the word?
The root.
The root is actually Islam. So that's where someone says that, hey, I'm a Muslim. It's a person that actually submits to God. So, I mean, that goes back to the verse that I mentioned earlier, that do not return back to me, God says to you, that do not return back to me unless you're in full submission. Again, also piggybacking off what the Rabbi said earlier, which is from seeking knowledge from the cradle to the grave. Always being in studious mode, always being in trying to open your heart and letting God enter. Always willing to learn and humble yourself. I mean, before you learn, you have to humble yourself, right? You have to understand that you have to say to yourself, hey, I don't know everything, right? I don't know everything. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know the way. I'm in darkness. And then ultimately letting God into your heart and humbling yourself, I think is the first initiative. And I think a lot of people stop that. I think humbling yourself and realizing that you're not superior, you're not all-knowing, you're not all-seeing, you're not so intelligent as you think you are. You know, it goes back to the Quranic verses, and I'm going to stop there, Mr. Darcy. It's where when God was creating Adam and Eve, the angels asked God, why are you going to create these creatures? They're going to create havoc. They're going to kill and murder and do all these terrible things. And God answered to them saying that you don't know what I know. Right? So we have to understand that we don't know everything, right? We're limited, but it's ultimately your submission to God and let Him lead you, right? And that comes through humility.
So it's also amazing because we have the same exact midrashic story.
He wore the same jacket because he
No, what I did was I coordinated my pants with your shirt. Yeah, we could do that. I'll make it nice and easy. Ditto. We agree. Right? And I think that for us as Jews, I think it's also about semantics. Right? It's about language. We use the word submission, but is it real submission that we understand today, or is it about faith and belief and having a relationship with God? So the submission itself is believe in me, trust in me. You can abandon me, and that's fine. You can always come back to me, and I am always here for you. And I think that very much like the Islamic tradition, and certainly the Christian tradition, is very much the Jewish perspective, right? Because I think if we did it in the line here, I think we invented it. What? We invented it. We created it, right? And then it was adapted in various ways. But that understanding of having faith and having deep belief can lead to much more. And I think it's in those relationship moments that and I think when we look at the term submission, it's how much are we willing to give? How much are we willing to try to understand?